children. And Gary, I wonder, just watching this story, how far this will go. How far can the present players who've been doing this continue this? And what other sport? I mean, could we see this in football?
Oh, I definitely think we already start to see. First of all, thanks for having me on the show. We've already started to enjoy and have moments where, and for me, I say enjoy, have moments where we're seeing these NFL players move into this space as well. You have to realize, though, by way of background, NFL players don't necessarily have the same freedoms because a lot of it is tied to their contracts. Their money isn't guaranteed. Mm-hmm. So their career could last perhaps 3 to 5 years. And so they feel some of the times, and I can't speak for all of them, they feel like, let me just get in, get this money, do my job, and perhaps later when I'm retired or move on to a different outlet in life, I can speak out more boldly in the way that I want. But watching these NBA players who have guaranteed contracts, watching them speak so comfortably and live in their own humanity, I think has really emboldened so many other leagues as we've seen. And I think you'll see the same with the NFL. I will say this, though. Everyone is calling this a strike or a boycott. Well, I think that we need to take a moment and realize what it was. Have you ever worked someplace and you needed a mental health day? Have you ever felt as if I am exhausted by everything that is happening, so I need to take a day? To me, what we're not realizing, these players are inside of this bubble, literally a bubble in Orlando, Florida, where they can only eat, sleep, and play together, don't see their families. They can't interact with other people in person outside of the players, their coaches. And they're exhausted, not only from that experience, but also from what they're just sitting and watching consistently and constantly on television. And so when LeBron James tweets, using an expletive, he is exhausted. But that is just the tip of the iceberg. And they needed that day. They needed that moment to vent. They needed that time. So at the end of the day, what Chris said was so great. I don't necessarily need them to have key moves after this. But what they did do was something that started a conversation that made people who are sitting in their homes feel different about this movement and about this moment and understand that it is so important to look at these people as humans. They are humans, and sometimes we forget that.
That is such a good point, Carrie. And Chris, to your point about starting a conversation, I sat with my 2 children, age 13 and 11, and we watched your clip. We watched Robert Horry's clip that same night, and we sat and watched it together. And they asked a bunch of questions, and we started that conversation. So I want to thank you for that. Do you believe now that we're going to see some progress out of it? Because as you guys are all saying, the NBA players now have grabbed the countries by the lapel for a moment and say, stop. We need to talk about this. So what comes next, I guess, is the question. It's the same thing that happened after the killing of George Floyd, where the country stopped. There needed to be real change out of that. So from your vantage point, Chris, what is that change? What happens now?
Well, it starts with an awareness, and then that change has a ripple effect through the youth. Your son, I'm sure, looks at this world a little bit differently than we did when we grew up. I think that these guys getting in good trouble is great. I think what Carrie said about a mental health day is correct, but I also think that guys were willing to put their basketball financial livelihood on the line, because really some of these guys make more money outside of basketball. The fact now that you have a platform where you can reach your own, you can reach kind of your own base, so to speak. But I think what's going to be next is if politicians who've been in this for so long can't come together and make change, then you can't expect the athletes to have an answer right away. This is what I expect to happen. I expect the athletes to say, okay, we're going to get back to playing, but in the meantime, we're going to meet with experts, politicians, we're going to meet with people in our community, and I think they're going to start a groundswell of change in each neighborhood where these guys come from, each team. I mean, you look at it, it's already been done, whether it's like the ladies that you have on and you've seen what kind of they've been through and what they've had to do and fight much bigger platforms and media to have their words. Well, you know, there's people like Jalen Rose that have schools in Detroit. There's other guys that have companies and are employing people. So I expect a couple of things. 1, to get with their local government. 2, to go in their own pocket and make change until change catches up. 3, to make sure that people look like them that they're speaking to. So for little black boys that are scared in their neighborhood, that are scared to walk to the store, that may have the world in front of them. Well, they get to see shows like this, and you have us on, and we're talking. And trust me, it's a different vibe reverberating when you hear these ladies talking or myself talking, and we're talking to our people there. And so I think what you're going to see is a groundswell of confidence, a groundswell of, hey, let's work in this together. And I think these players are going to start working with players around other leagues. And trust me, I have friends that play soccer internationally. When this catches on, because over there it's crazy. They're throwing bananas at guys on the soccer field. We need to address a whole bunch of issues. But I think you're going to start seeing it happen amongst the athletes and doing it ourselves. And if that happens, that'll be special, because the politicians are going to have to catch up later.
Yeah, and a great point. This isn't just an American problem. I follow European football, and the racism from the stands there for players who are not white, at times just absolutely outrageous. Speaking of absolutely outrageous, here's Jared Kushner, the president's top advisor, a guy who inherited hundreds of millions of dollars and who, when he feels like getting out of a crisis inside the White House, takes his family and flies on his jet to Vail or Aspen. Here's Jared Kushner criticizing athletes who spoke out.
I think that the NBA players are very fortunate that they have the financial position where they're able to take a night off from work without having to have the consequences to themselves financially. So they have that luxury, which is great. There's a lot of activism, and I think that they've put a lot of slogans out. But I think that what we need to do is turn that from slogans and signals to actual action that's going to solve the problem.
Jemele, you wrote about Jared Kushner's insensitive remarks in Atlantic. Tell us your take.
My take is that it's really interesting that he wants to talk about luxury and comfort when he has the luxury and comfort of his father-in-law being the president and him constantly being put in charge of things that he's wholly unqualified to do. The NBA players are a lot better at their jobs than he is at his. So I thought it was really interesting that he would be the one to throw some of these attacks. But he knew what he was doing. And frankly, it's a tired narrative, a tired trope that Black people, whether they be athletes or anybody that's in a prominent position, if you're Black, we're constantly told how grateful that we need to be for the things that we've accomplished. And despite the fact that we've worked very hard to earn those things, we were given nothing. And so these players, when they're not performing and when they're not in their sport, they still have to be Black in America. They pay taxes just like a lot of people watching right now, just like you do and everybody on this panel. And so that gives them the right to criticize their own government. That gives them the right to talk about the conditions in this country. And I'm just tired, frankly, of us being told in both overt and sometimes subtle ways that we just need to shut up and be quiet and be grateful. And that's basically what Jared Kushner was saying. So I found his comments to be laughable and, frankly, embarrassing for somebody in that position.
Carrie, I see you nodding and shaking your head. Final word to you.
I'm nodding and shaking my head because my co-host is so eloquent in what I like to call professional ether. She says it the best, and I enjoy it. And I'm sitting here enjoying every moment of what she and Chris have to say. I think the final word is this. For those who are at home watching and said that they're tired of hearing about Black Lives Matter and they're exhausted with hearing about all of these protests and different issues, please understand how exhausted we are as Black people.
Yeah.
And we're exhausted asking for the simple equality. We don't want revenge. We just want equality. And it is so simple if we can all get on board and hand it to us. So if you're tired, I don't know what to tell you, but please join in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now is not the time to sit down and rest. Hey, Chris, it's not fair, I don't think, to take people's quotes that are a couple of decades long. So when I'm going to bring up a couple of quotes that I know you're familiar with and sports fans are familiar with, not to criticize these people, but to just talk about how much things have changed. Obviously, Charles Barkley famously once said that he wasn't a role model, and Michael Jordan talked about how Republicans buy sneakers too. It is pretty remarkable, though, what these times have required of basketball stars and others that so many of us look up to, so many of our children look up to, and that sort of that laissez-faire approach is just no longer permissible.
Well, yeah.
Well, I mean, not that it's not permissible. It's just, I mean, everybody's free to do whatever everybody wants to do. Let me just say it more, that I think that you have a lot more players that will think twice before adopting that sort of attitude in 2020.
Yeah, and I think the platform of having, being able to have Instagram and others has changed it. But knowing Michael Jordan, he said that quote, but personally, I've seen him give millions of dollars away and not let anyone say. Personally, from Charles is going to be mad, but from Hurricane Katrina and back, I've seen him do that. But, it's so much to risk. And shout out to Dr. John Carlos, who in 1968 put his fist up. I don't think he's a mentor of mine. I still don't think that the country understands. He still gets hate and vitriol. He still is not honored the way that he should. He signed with a shoe company at that time. That shoe company doesn't honor him, doesn't want to be a part of him. I believe that Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, number one, when he decided not to go to the Olympics. Number two, when he changed his name, he wasn't respected. Number three, I don't think he gets that respect from the nation today because of how he protested. Muhammad Ali showed us that you can protest against the unjust war for everyone, and then the majority still be mad at you. And so if it were not for, in my opinion, if it were not for sports and athletes doing this, and the way that Jemele Hill brought it up earlier, sports gives you a common enemy. Cleveland can be against Detroit. Detroit can be against LA. So if you're white and you're black, it's us together today against them. That's the premise of sports. That helps these conversations. The first time I imagined that a white man said, hey, son, you need to be like that black guy there. Look how he works. Probably was Jackie Robinson. The first time a black man comes into the living room is probably on TV. And we're always changing the narrative. And that's why I wanted to be in the media, because I would hear these stories and go, why are they honoring Jackie Robinson? He was mad as hell when he passed away at them because there was no black managers. But just because everybody's wearing 42, we're happy. And so there's a deeper level that we athletes see, even though we all put on this one face because we don't want to be pried on by the media personally. But it's a lot more going there than what you think. And I just have to give LeBron James just so much credit. I have to give these other guys credit because today you take bullies home with you on your phone. You can't escape it, whether you're in the bubble or whether you're not in the bubble. These bullies, these comments can follow you home. And I just hope that people realize that there are a lot of other things that these guys could be doing, but their families are in these areas and they're really committed to making change.
Chris Webber, thank you so much. And Jemele Hill and Cari Champion, your new show is Stick to Sports. Wednesday is at 10 o'clock p.m. on Vice TV. Let's take a look.
Cari Champion and Jemele Hill on Sports and the Pandemic.
If LeBron wants to play, we playing.
Sports and Politics.
Washington had no choice but the changes made.
Sports and the President.
If he doesn't pick a black woman, you're not voting for him?
Okay, not exactly sports.
You ever dated a white man?
Cari, that's not the point.
Fine. Talk about whatever you want.
I put ketchup on my tacos, and I don't think anything is wrong with it.
Cari and Jemele Stick to Sports. Wednesdays at 10.
I don't think there's anything wrong
one
with
of the
it
great
either.
titles, actually, Jemele. Maybe one of the great titles since like Shut Up and Play. It was an album, I think Frank Zappa had an album called Shut Up and Play. But what a great title. Where did you come up with it?
Well, it's interesting because, Jemele and I both worked at ESPN. I'm sorry, we both are talking. That's what we do. This is the show, guys. It's happening right now. We both worked at ESPN, and so when we left ESPN, we thought that we would take the idea of what many people asked us to do while we were there, and that would just stay in that one lane. As you know, there's the shut up and dribble. And so whenever we would venture out of that lane, maybe with the Colin Kaepernick story, people would send us, the bullies, as Chris talked about a moment ago, would say, stick to sports, you don't even know what you're talking about. But those who tell you to stick to sports, you guys know this, are uncomfortable with our take on what we're seeing in the world and how it relates to sports. Our show is honestly an intersection of all of those things: sports and politics, sports in the world, sports and entertainment, sports and culture. And we have a lot of fun, but what we like to call it is just, we're giving you medicine, but we're giving it to you with a little bit of candy. As Black journalists, I feel that it is so important for us to speak up about what we see, because what's happening in the country right now requires someone who's who's lived that life, and not to say that everyone can't do it, but we see it because we've experienced it and we know it firsthand. And all we're asking right now, especially with our show, is for you just to see us, the humanness in us, the humanity in us. And has her professional ether, as you guys are familiar with. And it's a great watch.
Well, thank you very much, both of you, for being on this morning to talk about these really vital issues impacting our country. And we can't wait for the new show. It looks amazing. So thank you both very much.
Thanks.
And
thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube. And make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.